Hi, welcome everybody. We're going to be talking about the second major category in Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers for why people become successful. And that category is the 10,000 hours of work. And this is an important category. It's one that almost all of you will probably invoke or use in your paper to a certain extent, namely because it's one that is very central to most people's stories in terms of why they become successful. But even more than that, more importantly, it's a kind of story that successful people like to focus on as the reason for their success. Very simply put, is the 10,000 hours of work derives from a study that Gladwell makes reference to in the book regarding musicians and their time at school and the amount of practice that they put in as performance majors. And he finds, or the person doing the study finds, that the number of hours that the person puts in serious work towards the accomplishment of the goal of becoming a performing musician, that this more or less dictates or suggests the level to which that person will rise in their professional life. So those people who practice a moderate amount of time, well, they might go up to be people who are professional musicians in a small regional orchestra somewhere. Above and beyond that, you might find people who practice a little more and they become members of more prestigious orchestras in, say, larger cities. And then finally, the very top rung are the people who are the superstars of the realm. And those are the ones who go on and have, solo careers, such as we'll see later on in the likes of Lang Lang, who is a great Chinese pianist that for most intents and purposes is probably the most famous pianist in the world, and certainly of his generation. But we'll talk about more about that later. So the idea is very simple. It's the idea of simply paying your dues, that you have to put your time in order for you to be accomplished or to attain mastery at a certain undertaking. In the case of Gladwell, in that story, he was talking about musicianship. He also goes to show the same kind of phenomena with respect to Bill Gates, and how Bill Gates would sneak away in the middle of the night to go programming the mainframe computer that he could get access to, but only in the middle of the night. And therefore, it's Gladwell's claim that all that time that he spent programming that computer gave him a sense of mastery, a sense of being able to do what he needed to do in order to establish Microsoft later on. So, it's really not unforeseen in that you would find people who have 10,000 hours as part of their story, and that they would focus on it. I mean, it's almost always a story you find successful people talking about how they had to work hard in order to attain what they want. They find that is the story that more or less legitimizes their success. Because let's face it, almost all the other categories that Gladwell is talking about are things that are out of a person's specific individual control. I mean, who your parents are and what your influences are early on in life, you don't really have a choice over that. The time and place where you're born, you don't have a choice over that. The people that you run into and who help to make you achieve your goal and are influencers and mentors, you don't have any control over that. That's all luck, essentially. But the one item here that Gladwell refers to is this story of putting in your time and doing what it takes in order to to be competent, or maybe even beyond competent to become masterful. It's not a term that we particularly use in the United States right now, interestingly enough. That would be a whole nother discussion. But, mastery is a term that I think belongs to other countries, other cultures, where labor and labor unions and labor legislation that values labor and moves it towards people ever increasing their mastery and becoming better and better at the thing that they do, is not something really that we see in the United States. Here, our history has been such that we're really more about flexibility in terms of our workforce. So that's why we end up, many of us, doing 3, 4, 5, 6 different jobs over the course of our lifetimes. We're not allowed to seek mastery. Whereas, say in Central Europe, where you're brought up in a strict kind of environment where you're studying a kind of vocational line or approach, then you're a carpenter. You're a carpenter your whole life, and you get better and better and better and better until you become a master carpenter. Kind of the way plumbing works in this country, right? Plumbing is still that way, where you start off as an apprentice, and then by the time you're at the end of your career, you become a master plumber, and you make really good money. Certainly, better money than you might expect. In any case, work is the story here, and it's something that is important. It's salient to almost everybody's life that you're going to look at, and sometimes it's, in the case of the musicians, practice, 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 practice. You'll see when we get to the Lang Lang paper that the discussion of his practice routines is nearly half the paper, just because the person did such wonderful research on what his practice regimen was as he, when he was a young kid and then as he grew. It's really quite striking. Quite honestly, one of the most interesting things about that paper is the fact that I can't imagine any American parent allowing their child to be, put through the ringer in terms of the amount of practice that Lang Lang went through in order to achieve his level of mastery that he has today. We're more likely to put emphasis on, that's all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy kind of approach. But that's not the way it works in other cultures. And so you might find some of that kind of influence with respect to this topic, if you're doing somebody who's a foreign character or foreign person outside the United States. So the other thing I would basically want to mention here about this section with respect to the work and mastery is that there isn't always going to be a simple and straightforward approach to marking this. For musicianship, like I said, it's hours of practice. For an actor or something like this, you might want to look at the various different roles somebody took or the amount of time that they spent in acting school. Most of the time, though, it's built up in terms of the time that they put in before they really got noticed and blew up as an actor. But, even that's fairly straightforward. It gets more complicated if you're looking at, people who are, doing something that maybe they didn't have explicit practice early on in terms of the, item that they become famous in. But maybe, if you find a famous scientist or something, maybe you can show that their early exposure to mathematics or a related skill to, invention or engineering or something like that, that could be a way in to, to show and illustrate that this person has put in their 10,000 hours. Now, some people like to do an actual summary of the number of hours by saying, hey, they did this many hours when they were this age, and this many hours when they did this age, and it comes and it relates to 10,000 hours. I think in the Gladwell book he said that 10,000 hours is roughly related to about 9 to 10 years of concerted effort, where you're really looking at something and looking at it and studying it intensely. That will lead to mastery. So, that's pretty much what 10,000 hours of work is about. It's also probably important to note that just because you put the time in doesn't mean necessarily you will reach mastery. I think the key ingredient here that Gladwell leaves out for a lot of this discussion is that you have to do this work in a rather intense manner. To just go there and go through the motions for your 10,000 hours doesn't really quite achieve the same thing. Not that you'll be able to necessarily differentiate that or indicate that in your discussion, but it's just something to think about in particular when you're talking about this topic. This is probably the most well-known aspect of this book, and the one that people talk about, about putting your 10,000 hours in. In fact, I would say that putting your 10,000 hours in as a phrase has really kind of replaced the old time saying of putting your dues in now. The book, like I said, is a well-known book, well-received book, and some of the language that Malcolm Gladwell has adopted has become kind of standard usage. So enjoy this section and set yourself up for looking for some aspect of the 10,000 hours in your person's life. Take care, and we'll talk to you next time.